So what if you talked about it in a way that like helps her, like an example of something to make her help her relate to it, rather than, I know you can't talk in school, but like when the teacher asks or this happens, like one of you said, how do we help? I think it was you, about my child is using his words, but he can't talk in bigger groups. Why can't you talk in a big group? I don't know. I just can't. But what if we made it smaller? There's something called the train ride. I call it the train ride, where you start on the first car, like you're starting on your first journey, and there's like the teacher and one or two peers, and maybe they're doing question and answers. They check off, I can do it. Then they go to the next part of the train stop, and now we add two more kids. And these are buddies, and you rotate buddies in and out, and eventually you have the whole class. But maybe he needs scripts. Maybe he needs predetermined questions. The teacher's going to ask this. Maybe the first word is yes, and he has yes written out. So maybe in a bigger group, he's like writing and reading or using an intermediary, but where is the place he can start? So instead of let's get him to talk in a big group, it's kind of interesting. The analogy I want to give all of you is that if you think of a staircase, the first floor and second floor, we don't like say, how do I get to the second floor? How do I get there? There's steps. So many of the things we're going to do is break things down to what they can accomplish. And kind of that's what the bridge is, right? What can they do? And we start there, but we don't end there. We start there and then we move. And based on the loud, large, lots of people, the expectation, who's there, we may need to bridge down a little bit to get back up. That's the way I want everyone to see this, rather than how do you get to the second floor? How do we break it down into steps so that it's accomplishable? So I'd want him to understand the train ride. And that's something that we can talk about, or you can talk about in treatment. And that he's part of that. And there's charts for him to see. You know, charting is good because the kids can see it. They can check it off. I have the kids check it off. They make new feelings charts every time we're with them so that they understand it's their feelings chart, not mine. It's their bridge, not mine. That's why all the kids are making their own bridges, because they own it.
I'll share, at 6, I don't know if Ari was in the place to fully grasp what he was going through either. In the past 2 years, I'm able to build those conversations with him and kind of do, practice questions. And he is a little kid, so I try to make it fun, like, what do we say when someone comes up and says, hi, how are you? Do you say, I like watermelons? No, of course not. What would you say? And like, just kind of make it silly and fun. And then he giggles and he's like, no, like, I'm good, or I'm not good, or whatever. And I think, again, we just have to think about creative ways to do what we want to.
There's so many fun high-buy games. Yeah. The high-buy copy-back game. There's the Big Five. And then there's the different types of waves to make it fun and engaging for the kids. And it's about figuring out what works for them, because everybody is so different. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this question, but I think it was the two of you said, when do you consider homeschooling? And do you like homeschooling? And I want to put this out there on the podcast, because I have people go, you hate homeschooling. You don't like homeschooling. And that stinks that you don't like homeschooling. And I think I shared this yesterday. It's not that I'm against homeschooling. I'm all about it if there are appropriate social communication opportunities for these kids. Because the worst thing we can do for our kids is not expose them to social communication. And we've had families that we work with that the child is virtual, does not have regular get-togethers, doesn't have peer relationships, and when they're near peers, they're terrified. So the thought of even coming to CommuniCamp can be very, very hard, because it's a school and there's kids. So if you homeschool, listeners, you've got to figure out, how can we get frequent social communication opportunities with similar age children on a regular basis, because that's where they're going to learn how to navigate conversations, social interactions. And that has to be done not once a week, not in a big group of 50 people. So that's my issue with homeschooling. So sometimes it's the lack of, and this was a theme among all of you, the need for school-based accommodations and interventions that are specific. When a family says, can I have a sample IEP or a sample 504? Of course, there's general recommendations. But what is specific for your child based on his or her needs? And everyone has small group. It's what you do in the small groups, with who you do it, how you question, when you question, where you question. It's all of the nitty gritties. It's not just small groups in and out of the room and a buddy process. Everyone has that. It's how do you work the buddies? It's where are they on their stages? What's the focus of the small group? When do you question? Who do you bring in? So accommodations, interventions, if you're in a public school, at the minimum, you can qualify for a 504 because SM affects the major life activity of speaking. And depending on, the other comorbidities or whys and the degree or severity of SM, an IEP may be in order. Because some schools and some states, some schools and states like New Jersey, for example, they can do a lot under a 504, a lot. But some states, anytime you do a small group out of the room, it has to be an IEP. So it really depends on what state you're in and what they can offer you. Private schools can work if they're willing to provide some accommodations, interventions. Some private schools are like, Like my children went to private school. I love public school, just worked for my family, and they were able to help when Sophie was little. But not all schools will say they have the resources to do it. And so public school by nature has to support you. But it's about what is realistic. And one of your questions was like, they don't have time. That's where you need additional staff to come in and work with your child in the group. And for more severe kids that have more needs, that can't engage, can't even non-verbally respond well, we may need to get an aide or a shadow, someone that comes in and is the facilitator. Because it's not going to be 24/7 in school. It's not going to be all the time, but somebody to teach the teachers how to facilitate. And many of the accommodations and interventions aren't that hard. It's how you question and what you say. It doesn't have to be this major change in their curriculum at all. But things like friendship groups, recess bunch, clubs, activities, sometimes involving other kids, takes letters to those parents and other, you know what I mean? So it's how do we get this going in the school?
Thing I will say, I did look into homeschooling because, but we have an active homeschool groups in our area, and those kids are so busy. Sometimes they're busier than. So I would feel comfortable if we had to go that route doing that because they have co-ops and they're very, very organized. They're going to the state capitol visit. They're doing this. They get together a lot, but other areas don't. So I would never do homeschooling if I didn't live in a place where I had access to a really strong, good co-ops or, that type of thing because, then it's not going to be helpful at all.
Yeah, you can't you can't learn a skill if you don't have opportunity to practice the skill. There's just no other way. Exposures. Any other thoughts on that?